The Buffalo Bills walked into Week 12 needing every spark they could find, and instead, one of the biggest storylines was who wasn't on the field. Keon Coleman, a player the team hoped would grow into a reliable part of their passing attack, remained on the sideline for a second straight week. This wasn't an injury decision. This wasn't a snap count strategy. This was a message. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Against Houston, the Bills' offense looked drained of energy and creativity. They needed size, they needed separation, they needed a threat on the outside, all things Coleman was drafted to provide. Yet there he was, inactive once again, watching while the offense struggled to stay afloat. Before we dive deeper into the latest updates out of Buffalo, before listening to the latest news, subscribe to the channel, like it, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Let's move on to the new news. Now, back to Coleman. This second benching goes way beyond a simple late arrival to a meeting. That incident before the Tampa Bay matchup might have been the spark, but it clearly wasn't the whole fire. Buffalo had major injury issues at wide receiver this week. They were thin, they were shifting pieces, they were looking for bodies who could step in immediately, and still, the team chose not to dress Coleman. That alone tells you everything. If the Bills believed this was just about tardiness, he would have been active. If this was just a one-off disciplinary reminder, he would have been back on the field once the lesson was delivered. Instead, Buffalo doubled down. For a team fighting to stay alive in the playoff race, that is not a small decision, it's a statement about expectations, standards, and professionalism inside the locker room. The Bills need him. The offense needs him. And if this team wants to correct its course heading into Week 13, Coleman has to respond the right way. Because Buffalo can't afford for this storyline to drag on any longer. They need production. They need discipline. They need him locked in, immediately. For the Bills coaching staff, this wasn't just about one late meeting anymore. By Week 12, it felt like the frustration around Keon Coleman had reached a breaking point. After the first benching, the team expected urgency, maturity, and a stronger response during practice. Instead, Coleman's week didn't convince anyone that he was ready to return. The result? Another Sunday in street clothes. Another reminder that talent alone isn't enough in Buffalo. And the moment he stepped out of the lineup, the ripple effect was impossible to ignore. The Bills' passing game collapsed. Houston crowded the short zones, dared Buffalo to win downfield, and the offense simply couldn't answer. The stat sheet may make the box score look respectable, but anyone who watched the game knows the truth. Most of the yardage came after short throws, desperate checkdowns, and receivers fighting for extra yards instead of winning routes on time. Buffalo had no vertical life. No consistent separation. No receiver who could take command of a defense. When your second leading weapon is a third down running back and your next option is a tight end mainly known for blocking, you're not attacking, you're surviving. Even next-gen tracking painted the picture clearly. Josh Allen covered more ground just escaping pressure than any Bills wideout did running their routes for most of the game. That's not an offense. That's damage control. Allen spent the afternoon fighting off pass rushers, absorbing hits, and trying to create something out of chaos. But this wasn't Carolina. This was a stronger, faster defense shutting every window the moment it opened. Buffalo needed size on the perimeter. They needed someone who could win physically. They needed Coleman. And that's why this situation matters so much. Despite everything, the coaching staff hasn't walked away from him. Sean McDermott made that clear. Discipline was necessary, expectations weren't met, but the belief is still there. They want Coleman to respond, to grow, to become the weapon this offense desperately lacks. But belief only goes so far. Eventually, the player has to meet the moment. Right now, Coleman hasn't. And for a team hanging on to its season every week, that is becoming harder to overlook. When Sean McDermott addressed the media after Coleman's first benching, his tone carried a mix of patience and warning. He talked about trust, how it's earned slowly, how every day becomes a step toward proving you belong. But only a day or so passed between that statement and the next game, and Coleman clearly didn't make the impression the staff hoped for. McDermott didn't blast him publicly, but he didn't offer reassurance either. "No, he's turning the corner," "No," he responded, well, nothing to hint that Coleman was moving in the right direction. And that silence said a lot. The question now is simple: what does Buffalo do with him? Some fans want patience. Others want urgency. And after back-to-back scratches during a stretch where the offense is starving for reliable production, the debate has never been louder. There's a strong argument that the Bills should look forward instead of backward. Yes, the draft day decisions around Coleman have become painful to revisit, especially when players taken immediately after him are producing elsewhere. But every team misses on picks. What matters is what you do once you realize a gamble isn't paying off. If the Bills can find a trade partner willing to send a late-round pick, that may be the cleanest solution. If not, the front office will face a choice between keeping a player who hasn't met the standard or cutting ties entirely. And the truth is harsh: keeping an unproductive receiver who isn't matching the locker room expectations only adds weight to an offense already fighting uphill. But here's the tough part: Buffalo still needs bodies. The Week 12 performance made that painfully obvious. The receiving group struggled to separate, struggled to threaten the defense, struggled to give Josh Allen anything that resembled a consistent target. The offense was so limited that even a flawed, inconsistent Coleman might be worth one more look simply because the alternatives weren't enough. Right now, the Bills are stuck between what Coleman has been and what he should be. And until he shows maturity, urgency, and the will to respond, the team is running out of reasons to wait. Next, the spotlight shifts to injuries, and there's a lot to cover. Nearly every unit took a hit in this game, and the list of players headed for evaluation keeps growing. Let's break down what the Bills are dealing with as they move into the new week. Before Week 12 even ended, the Bills were already facing a long and uncomfortable list of injuries, and every name on it matters. Josh Allen took a beating unlike anything he's endured this season. 8 sacks, constant pressure, and wave after wave of Houston defenders collapsing the pocket. By the fourth quarter, you could see the toll written all over him. One of the worst hits came when Will Anderson landed directly on Allen's shoulder. Allen mentioned afterward that he felt a flash of numbness, the kind of brief stinger that sends alarms across an entire sideline. Later, cameras caught him shaking out his wrist between plays, another sign that he was absorbing far more punishment than any quarterback should. And the truth is simple: everything Buffalo hopes for depends on Allen staying upright. If he misses time, the Bills' season would shift dramatically, and not in a good direction. Part of the problem came from the right side of the line. Spencer Brown had a long afternoon, repeatedly overwhelmed by Houston's front. It wasn't just losing one-on-one battles, it was the speed, the counters, the inside crashes, all of it kept Allen in survival mode. At a certain point, Buffalo had to start asking for extra help on that edge. The coaching staff now faces a week of evaluation, treatment, and urgency. The quarterback took too many hits. The protection wasn't consistent. And with the schedule tightening, Buffalo cannot afford for these issues to bleed into the coming weeks. The injury toll didn't stop with Josh Allen. The Bills took hits across multiple positions, and the most alarming losses came in the trenches and at linebacker, two areas this team simply cannot afford to weaken right now. Spencer Brown's afternoon was rough from the opening series, and by the time he left the field, it was clear something was seriously wrong. He had protective padding wrapped across his upper body, and after the game he was seen leaving the stadium with his arm in a sling. For a player who has quietly developed into one of the league's more reliable right tackles, this is a major concern. Brown's absence forces Buffalo into uncomfortable depth options, and the drop-off in protection was already evident the moment he exited. Terrel Bernard also ended the night in a sling, sidelined by an elbow injury that arrived on an unlucky collision, friendly fire, something the Bills seem to experience more than most teams. Bernard has battled injuries all year, so seeing him go down again was a gut punch to a defense that depends heavily on his range and instincts. Early evaluation suggested the injury might not be long-term, which is the only piece of optimism in an otherwise discouraging update. Then came the secondary. Max Harrison left the game for a concussion evaluation and never returned, which almost always signals trouble. If that diagnosis is confirmed, Week 13 becomes highly doubtful for him, and the Bills will be forced into heavier snaps for players who have struggled in coverage. Harrison had been one of the bright spots in the defensive backfield this season, but the hit he absorbed, lowering his head into contact, is exactly the kind of moment players are taught to avoid. A few other Bills cycled in and out of the blue medical tent as the game wore on, adding even more anxiety to a night already filled with injuries. Though some returned to action, the pattern was unmistakable. Buffalo came out of Week 12 battered, bruised, and with more questions than answers about who will be available moving forward. Connor McGovern's night didn't look promising at first. He went down grabbing at his left leg, clearly in pain, and the interior pressure from Houston wasn't doing him any favors. But to his credit, he battled back and returned on the next series. Even then, it was obvious the Texans were winning the fight inside. Buffalo's guards were pushed, twisted, and overwhelmed far too often, and McGovern was grinding through it while clearly less than 100%. Christian Benford's situation was just as concerning. After making a tackle, he clutched at his side and shoulder before leaving the field. He eventually returned, but this has become a familiar pattern for Benford: play through pain, come out, go back in, repeat. He has fought through injuries all year, and the Bills continue to lean heavily on him despite the wear showing more each week. The blue medical tent felt like a revolving door. Dion Dawkins went in for a concussion check. Reggie Gilliam went in for the same. James Cook too. All returned, but the message was unmistakable: Houston beat Buffalo physically from the opening whistle to the final snap. It wasn't one injury, or one position, or one unlucky play. It was the cumulative effect of a long, punishing afternoon where the Texans imposed their will at almost every level. Buffalo leaves this game with more questions than answers: health, depth, protection, consistency, all of it now under review as they prepare for Week 13. The team is bruised, battered, and facing one of the most crucial stretches of the season. But the fight isn't over. Not even close.